Do you ever feel stuck arranging your songs, struggling to create a storytelling arc that truly captivates the listeners? Well, I've been there, and every producer has. Sitting for hours in front of your DAW, staring at copy-paste loop that never truly form a complete song. But here's the exciting part. Mastering a few arranging rules can help you turn 3 notes into an entire piece. I'm not kidding. That's exactly what classical composers used to do. Using a single motive, they would create epic orchestral masterpiece. Now, I'm not going to show you how to write for a 60-piece orchestra, but there are a few key lessons we can borrow from them. Hey, I'm Alex. I'm a music producer and I've worked with some of the biggest brands, and in this video I'm going to show you the 3 simple arrangement rules that any level of producer can use. I'll show you real examples from well-known hits and masterpieces, as well as some from my own music. So by the end of this video, you'll be armed with the skills to turn a simple idea into a full-fledged hit song. Now let me ask you a question. Have you ever noticed how fast people skip through songs on Spotify? The other day I was driving in my car, listening to some songs on Spotify, hoping to find my next favorite artist, but as I was cycling through them, I realized something. I would skip almost every song within the first few seconds. Guess what? I'm not alone. In 2014, Spotify found something shocking. 24% of listeners would skip song within the first 5 seconds. By 30 seconds, a third of them were gone. The takeaway is pretty brutal. If your intro doesn't hook them right away, you could be losing nearly 50% of your listeners before they even reach the good part of your song. Let me show you a couple examples you might recognize. That's a strong opening statement, isn't it? Now let's jump ahead a couple centuries. Pretty catchy too, right? It's crazy to think that these two artists worked nearly 200 years apart from each other, but they still use the same technique to create massive hits. That leads us to our first rule. Grab your listeners' attention from the very start. You only have 5 seconds before they might skip. Now, let's see how we can turn a tiny idea into a full story that keeps the listener glued to their headphones. Have you seen Interstellar? If not, don't worry. Early in the movie, there's a scene where dust swirls across the bedroom floor. It looks mysterious, but you don't really think about it twice until the end, when the exact same scene reappears but seen from a different dimension. Suddenly, this everyday moment takes a whole new meaning just from this change of perspective. Okay, now you might be thinking, why the heck is he talking to me about multi-dimensional travel instead of beats and bars? Let's go back to that Bruno Mars songs for a bit. Recognize that line? That's the exact same line you hear in the chorus. That's what classical composers used to call a motif, which act like the plot of your song. In modern production, a motif doesn't have to be the main melody. It can be a bass line, a percussion loop, a groove. It's whatever ties your track together. But just like the Interstellar scene, how you present that motif makes all the difference. I want you to think of your song like a stage play. Your motif is your storyline and your instruments are the characters. They might exit and re-enter the stage or offer new perspective. You don't need to reinvent the wheel in every section. You just need to present that motif in a fresh way each time. Check out this song by Bruno Mars. First the verse.
Guess who's back again? Oh, they don't know. Oh, they don't know. I bet they know as soon as we walk in. Shut up, I'm wearing Cuban link.
And now the chorus.
Moon. Girls, what y'all trying to do? 24 karat magic in the...
Did you notice what changed in the instrumental? Almost nothing. Just one arpeggiated synth. But it keeps it fresh. Let me show you a couple of practical examples. So now I'm going to explain how I use that concept I just talked about in one of my tracks. So I'm going to start at the end of the verse. So we're going to hear at the end of the verse, the pre-chorus, and then the 2 sections of the chorus. And you're going to see how I use the same idea, but the way I presented it makes it feel totally fresh in each section. Check this out. you notice that in each of this section, I use the exact same chord progression? What changed is the way I presented my ideas. So if you go in the verse, it's very plucky sounding. Check. There's a lot of plucky sounds, very accent based. While we go in the pre-chorus, it's very sustained. So it feels super different, but really it's the same chords. It's almost the same drum groove. There is very subtle variation in each of the instruments, but it's the same idea really. And then we drop into that chorus, that first half. Check. I don't know if you noticed, but that's the exact same bass line I used in the verse. Basically what I did is that I only kept the bass line and the drums. I actually simplified the drums to create more space, and I just left those two. It's like this kind of anti-drop thing. But this makes it feel fresh, because it's the same idea just from a different angle. So here's our second rule. Think of your song like a movie or a stage play. The story will be told through different characters and perspective. This will keep your listeners engaged from start to finish. Since we were talking about stage play, think back to the students' production in middle or high school. Sorry if you were in them. If you ever went, you might remember how half of the audience was either nodding off or on their phone. Why? Because attention is the single most valuable thing we can capture, but it's also the hardest to keep. We live in a time where attention span is shrinking by the minute. We're constantly bombarded with content, information, update, and if something is not engaging right this second, we tune out. But guess what? That includes music too. Ever noticed how Netflix shows almost always end up on a cliffhanger? That's because they want you to watch the next episode. So here's how that applies to music. Think of each 8 bars of your song like a different episode from the same TV show. And your goal is to keep the listener so engaged and intrigued by the end of these 8 bars that they have to stay to hear the next one. This brings us to rule number 3. Don't let more than 8 bars pass without changing something. You do this by either adding a new element, removing one, or altering the pace, and you can even push yourself to do this every 4 bars. If you live by this rule, you'll keep your audience on the edge of their seat, just like these binge-worthy TV shows. Now let's jump into DAW so I can show you how it works in a real track. Now that you've nailed this essential, there's one final silent hack top producers swear by to hook their listeners. So if you're ready to supercharge everything you just learned, click this video and I'll show you how one trick can transform your entire arrangement.